This is the Significant Man Recharge Show. I'm your host, Warren Peterson. We're Christian men who talk about the important topics that matter in life. We're men who live in this world, but who are not of this world. You know your life can be busy, noisy, and chaotic. This is the show for you to get renewed, restored, and to recharge. So let's get started. Welcome, gentlemen. On today's show, I'm speaking with Blake Brewer, who shares his powerful and incredible story that led to his work with Legacy Letter. Every father needs to pay attention here and follow along with what Blake has to say. It will have generational impact if you do. Now, Blake's on a mission to help 1 million dads write at least one well-written, meaningful, lasting legacy letter to their children. He has a wonderful wife and loves being a father to his 3 children, currently all under the age of 5. As he leads his family, he draws from many mentors, but none are more important than his late father, Larry Brewer. And I'm honored to be able to share this conversation with you. Hey, Blake, thanks for being on the show today. I'm looking forward to talking to you quite a bit.
Oh man, I'm glad to be here, Warren. Thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this all day.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just start at a high level. We're going to talk about Legacy Letter today, but definitionally, for people who don't know, have never heard of the idea, what is a legacy letter?
Well, my mission is to help 1 million dads write at least one well-written, meaningful, lasting legacy letter to their children. And so what I tell dads when we're writing this letter, we're communicating to their children everything that they need to hear from them to live confident, successful lives. So it's what a father, how he thinks about his children, how he feels about them, and then also some advice to help their children be successful in life.
That's cool. So we definitely have to get into all that. And so when you mentioned your mission, how did you get into this? What made this become your mission? What's the story behind this movement and this mission of yours?
Well, there's definitely a story
Yeah.
behind it. I didn't wake up one day and think, oh, for my career one day, I'm going to help dads write a letter to their
Yeah.
children. And but man, I gotta tell you, it's pretty cool how God has worked it all out, and I'm so grateful to be doing what I'm doing. But when I was 19 years old, we took a trip of a lifetime to Hawaii. So it was my mom, my dad, and my sister and brother, and we had gone to Colorado and Florida and places like that before, but we were going to Hawaii. Have you been to Hawaii before?
Yeah. Yes. Love it.
So we were, as soon as we got there, we tried to plan out all the things we wanted to do, and we wanted to go snorkeling. And so we went to a place called Hanama Bay. Did you ever go there?
That I have not been to. No. No.
Well, it's absolutely beautiful. And so when we got to the beach that first morning that we were there, we ran out into the water, and it was my mom and my dad and my sister and I out in the water, and we were seeing so many cool fish and saw a cool sea turtle, and we decided to go back in the shore where my mom was on the beach, and we all laid down next to my mom except for my dad. And my dad was standing there, and I'll never forget. He was like, "Man, we're in Hawaii. I'm not laying down on the beach. I want to go back out there." And my dad was an athlete, so my dad was drafted into the NFL, and his claim to fame was that he was Terry Bradshaw's tight end at Louisiana Tech, and caught Terry Bradshaw's first touchdown pass, and they were roommates and best friends in college. So I wasn't surprised. My dad was like, "Man, I don't want to rest. I want to go back down there. So go back out there." So he started walking down the beach, and I remember myself just laying there and thinking, "Man, I'm kind of enjoying just laying here on the beach, but I want to go be with my dad." And so I ran and caught up with him. And my dad, when I caught up to him, looked at me and said, with a big smile on his face, "Look who decided to join me." And
Yeah.
I've reflected on this, and my dad did for me in that moment what he had done for me hundreds and thousands of times in my life, which was he just simply expressed that he enjoyed being with me,
Yeah.
which is one of the best things a dad can do for his children is just to enjoy being with them. And so we went out, we put our snorkel gear on, and we went out into the water. And of course, we didn't just stay in the shallow end. We kept going further and further out, and we ended up in an area that I now know is called Witch's Brew. And in the middle of me having one of the coolest moments of my life, just being out there in this amazing place with my dad, I started to wonder where he was because I didn't see him anymore. And so I was started looking around, and all of a sudden I see him. And at this point, the waves had gotten really big, and I really couldn't see that far because the waves were literally so big. And I see my dad getting out of the water. And there was really only one place to get out of the water. This rock was kind of coming out of the water, and the waves were crashing against it. And I remember thinking, this is not a good place to get out of the water. I don't know why he's trying to get out right there. And sure enough, as he was about halfway up, a wave crashed against my dad and knocked him back down in the water. And so I thought I better get over there because he might be in trouble. And so I swam to where I thought my dad would be, and I I didn't see him, so I thought I need to get out of the water myself. One, I'm really tired, but to get a better view. And so on that same rock that my dad was not able to get out of the water, by the grace of God, I was able to get out of the water. And as soon as I get up on this rock, I'm looking down in the water, and there's my dad. And my dad was treading water, and he was yelling for help. And my dad had a deep, booming voice, and this yell for help was more like a whimper. And so I knew that my dad was in trouble. And so I turned around and faced the other side of the rock, which was the beach, and just started waving for the lifeguards. I had no idea. They were so far away, I didn't know if they could see me or not.
Yeah.
And so I turned back around and saw my dad in the water, and I just thought, I can't just stand here and do nothing. And so I made a decision to jump in the water after my dad. And at that point, it was probably 20 yards away from me, and I just started swimming towards him. And by the time I got to my dad, he was underneath the water, and he was unconscious. And I put my arms around him and just did the best that I could to try to swim with my dad to get him to shore. The lifeguards ended up showing up and put my dad on a surfboard and got him to shore. They started doing CPR to my dad, and I just remember being on my knees next to him and praying to God, God, would you please save my dad? And I look back, and in the moment, I felt like it was going to be like the movies when someone is they're doing CPR and the water just kind of comes out of their mouth and their eyes blink open and they kind of come to, and I just like at any moment surely this is going to happen, and it never did. My mom and sister eventually they look over and they see all this commotion down the beach, and they said that's where Dad and Blake were. And so they ran down there, and I had to tell my mom as she ran up to me, I'll never forget the look on her face, and I just said, Mom, it doesn't look good. And they ended up loading my dad in the ambulance. My mom went in the ambulance with him, and they got to the hospital where they pronounced my dad dead. And so back at the condo, so my sister and I got the rental car and went back to the condo, and it was a couple hours after my dad's death. And as you can imagine, this is like the lowest moment of my life.
Right.
Like, what in the world
Right.
has just happened?
Yeah.
I was the oldest son. I had to call back to my dad's parents, who were just devastated. My dad's work, my dad's brother, some other friends. And after those phone calls, I went to the back bedroom, and was just talking to God. God, what the heck just happened? What is going on? Where were you? And it was at that moment that my mom appeared in the doorway, and she said, I was going through your dad's briefcase, and I found something that he was going to give you on this trip. And I had no idea what she was talking about, but she walked across the room and handed me a couple sheets of paper. And at the top it said, Dear Blake, Natalie, and Marcus, my sister and brother's name. And she said, your dad for the last couple of months has been working on a letter, and he finished it and was going to give it to you guys on this trip. And I got to tell you, Warren, even before I read this letter, I felt incredibly loved that my dad, knowing that my dad spent a couple months of his life writing a letter about how he feels about us, and some advice, some life advice, just knowing that my dad did that for us. And he didn't know when he wrote it that it was going to be his last words to us, but essentially that's what it was.
Wow.
And it was a great letter of all of those things of my dad encouraging us, my dad telling us how he feels about us. And the last line of this letter, I now call his legacy line. And I hope other dads write their legacy line in their letter. But he said, "For your faith, you might be in the minority here on earth, but I assure you that in heaven, you'll be in the majority.
Mm.
Love your dear old dad in Christ Jesus." And it was exactly what I needed at that moment. As much as I missed my dad and still miss him to this day, 18 years later, just knowing, man, my dad's in heaven right now. And I've told people before, if God went to my dad and said, "Hey, Larry, do you want to go back down to earth?" He'd say, "Heck no. Like, I think I'm just going to stay right here and wait on them."
Yeah.
And so, as you can imagine, that letter impacted me in the moment, but is still impacting me to this day, as my dad's words and his voice is still in my life as I've gone through different phases of my life now. Now I'm married, now I have kids, and my dad's words continue to take on new meaning. And so it was probably about a year ago, a series of different events where I just realized that my calling was to help dads write a letter like my dad did for me. And so that's how we got started on the mission.
Wow. That's so powerful. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. It's been, like you said, it's been 18 years, but it's still, I'm sure, quite raw in many ways, even though you've, been able to share the story and use this for work for other men. And in the middle of that, and this might be a bit of a challenging question, but in the middle of that, you were describing, being there in that moment and kind of praying, thinking, God, where are you? Have you been able to work through that question since then?
Yeah, and I feel even through all of that, I never got upset at God or bitter at God. And I think God can handle that question.
Yeah.
I really like. Of course, He can handle that question.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a good thing for me to work through and just understanding God's sovereignty through it all. I don't know if God caused my dad to die or if He just allowed it. I don't know. And to be
Right.
honest, it doesn't matter to me.
Right.
My dad died. Uh, my dad was never promised to live to be 80 or 90 years old. You and I are not promised either.
Correct.
And so my dad had a good life, and I've told people I can just be thankful that for 19 years of my life I had a great dad. And so many other people don't even know their dad or have a bad dad, and so I
Yeah.
can just be grateful for the dad that I did have for the 19 years that I
Yeah.
had him.
Yeah. That why question, it's like in the book of Job, we can go through and and when we focus on the why, especially when there's no way to answer that, and it can really get us so far off track of what is the thing we're supposed to be learning, how are we supposed to share with the world, how are we supposed to encourage us as dads, how are we supposed to speak into our own children and speak life into our own children, and certainly your dad did that for you, and now it's awesome that you're doing that for other men. I noticed on your website, which is some all you got, everybody listening to this should go at legacyletterchallenge.com. Everybody should go there. But on your website, I wrote this quote down because I thought it was great. You wrote, "A father's voice is the most powerful voice on the planet." Now, obviously, your dad still speaks to you today in
Right.
that letter, and the how that work has impacted so many people. What does that mean to you when you say that the father's voice is the most powerful voice on the planet? What does that mean to you?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to go into this. I was talking to someone the other day about this idea that, for our moms, our and maybe it's something to do with us being actually physically attached to our mom at one point of our life, and we
Yeah.
kind of expect our moms to love us, kind of maybe at a subconscious level, like our mom loves us. And then when our dad loves us, it's this feeling of, man, no, my dad chooses to love me. And then I think there's so much there too spiritually with just our Heavenly Father. And so I think God has just set it up that way to where our imperfect earthly fathers are a representation of our heavenly fathers. And so when a father speaks, man, a child listens. And when I say a child, I really mean a person listens, because I was talking to a man in his 60s the other day, and he was replaying to me something powerful that his dad told him 10 years before when he was 50 years old, about how his dad loved him and how he was proud of him. I don't care what age you are, man, you want that so bad from your dad, to know that he approves of you and that he loves you. I love the story that Kobe Bryant shared about a year before his death. He said when he was 12 years old, he played summer league ball, and he didn't score a single point the entire summer. And he was so frustrated. And he got to the end of the summer, and his dad came up to him and put his arm around him and said, "Kobe, I don't care whether you score 0 points or 60 points. I'm going to love you no matter what."
Yeah.
And Kobe said that was the best thing that his dad could have ever told him, because at that point, he couldn't fail. He already had a dad that loved him, and so it actually freed him up to really try and to really practice more and to really try to make it. And so you hear that story about Kobe, and it's like, oh, okay, I see his success was tied to something his father told him when he was 12 years old, and he never forgot it, because that's the power of a father's voice. Like, that carried him through all those years.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're so right on that. I've talked with men in their, adult men, on in their lives, and they still want to know from dad, that affection is there. Are you proud of me? That's there. Are you encouraging me? Do you respect me? All those things continue on. The tone of voice might change. There might be, you know, we might get a little slower in our language as we get older, but we still want it, whether we're 10 years old or whether we're 50 years old. That's still something that all men definitely are craving.
Absolutely. I was sitting in a coffee shop several years ago, and I started talking to this man, and we really hit it off. And this man started telling me about his children. And so this guy was retired. He's probably in his mid 60s, and his children were in their 20s. And they really weren't doing that well. And he was kind of worried about them.
Yeah.
But then he started telling me in a separate conversation about, he made this comment to me, and I'll never forget it. He said, I still try to find myself, I still find myself living to please my dad. And this man's dad had died 30 years before. And he was still making daily decisions to try to please his dad. This man was not a Christian. This man was very successful in his life from a worldly point of view. Like, he had been the CEO of a company. I knew what neighborhood he lived in. It's like, oh man, this guy's done really, really well. But he had spent his whole life trying to achieve worldly success because he thought that might please his dad, and he ended up neglecting his children along the way. I connected the dots when he was telling me about his children. It's like, oh, I see what happened. You chose your career over your children. Oh, why did you do that? Oh, because you were trying to please your dad. And I don't even know if he understood all of that. But a lot of if we really got down to the core of why we do what we do, it's tied to our dad. A lot of the times. And so I tell dads, one of the best things you can do is to tell your children, and this is what we do as we're writing the letter, and what do your children have to do for you to be proud of them? And one of the things I tell the dads, it's not about what they do, it's who they are. And we focus on affirming their children and their character.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so strong. Yeah, the who you are, even for us as adult men, that's really such a core question. If we're able to translate that to our kids and help them really dig into that and investigate that and come up with a core answer on that, that's so helpful to really all of life. Because if you know who you are, it helps you with your decision making, it helps you with your relationships, it helps you with every aspect of your life. So being able to understand who you are really is so critical when you're working with guys and helping them write such a letter, right? Such legacy letter, is who you are and teaching who you are part of that process at all?
Well, yeah, and it's really the to add on to what you're saying, that it is the parents' job and the father's job to help our children understand who they are. And I think this is so important in the world that we live in right now, in this social media world where
Yeah,
you can get online and you're seeing your friends and you're just connected in that way, and you're seeing all the things that they do. And so what's happening right now is people, their identity is coming from their friends and the rest of the world. Well, we know from the research, and it just makes sense, but when someone's identity comes from not from their father and not from their parents, but from the rest of the world, and they start to, they, who their friends say that they are, that then they end up not being as successful. They're not as confident. They don't have as much emotional intelligence. And so it's absolutely a father's job to tell his children who they are, and to pick out those characteristics about them, and to help them see their potential, and to
yeah,
say, I believe in you.
yeah. Yeah, when we let our kids put their identity like that into the opinion and language of friends, that means friends' opinion and language can change your own definition of who you are. And that's really, really dangerous for kids, like you said, especially in the social media world where that stuff can just change just like that. We can have so much stuff happen just instantly on social media. And men, we misplace our identity so often by putting it in our careers, right? That becomes that answer to, well, hey, tell me about you, who are you? And we automatically default with our job as the first way that we answer that question, which I, on my side, I coach guys, don't do that, into all the various reasons why that's such a bad idea. So, but if I, to bring it back, then if I'm writing a legacy letter and I want to have stuff like who you are, and me expressing my pride and my appreciation for my children and so on, what are a few other things that guys should make sure that they include in the legacy letter? Or also, if it comes to mind, things that we should avoid, either way, what really has to be in there and what should we make sure isn't part of a legacy letter?
Well, so whenever I'm helping dads write their letter, so I coach dads one on one. I do some group coaching. I'm helping some dads out in California right now. A guy who used to play in the NFL, he bought the program for him and all of his buddies, and so they're going through it. And then most people go through my online course, and we've got 10 lessons, and we help them go through. And 4 of the lessons are to help a dad get his heart and his mind in the right spot even before he starts writing this letter. Because I'm like, hey, you're about to write this really impactful letter. This isn't the type of letter that maybe on Valentine, Warren, I know you don't do this, but on Valentine's Day, you buy your wife a card and then you sit out in the driveway and scribble something down real quick, and then you go inside and give it to her. This is a letter that we're spending, a month or so. So a dad can do it quicker than that, but man, you're really trying to
Right.
write your best stuff down and
Right.
really make it meaningful. And so I help dads come up with their vision for their family. One of the lessons that we do is a dad will write the letter um, from his father, that to him, the letter his father never wrote him, which is really powerful. And that helps you think through, okay, what are the things I for sure want to tell my children?
Yeah.
So we go through some lessons like that, and then when we start working on the different sections of the letter, and we developed the legacy writing method. And so I tell dads, you already have a letter in your heart, and so this method is just going to draw that letter out of your heart and onto a piece of paper. But we basically break the letter down into different sections. So there's one section on the 3 things that every person has to hear from their dad. I love you, I'm proud of you, and I believe in you. So I help dads write that. I help dads write the 3 to 5 pieces of advice that if you were on your deathbed and your children had their entire life in front of them, you've got 30 days to live. What are those pieces of advice that you're going to write to your children? Then I help dads apologize, express apologies and express regrets, because Warren, you're not a perfect dad. I'm not a
No, I'm
perfect
not.
dad. Nobody is a perfect dad. And so it's really powerful when a dad apologizes. And so we help dads do that. And then we also help dads come up with different memories that you have of your children. They'll help you can utilize those memories to really serve your children and give them more confidence.
And what kind of stuff then, the flip side of that, should I make sure I don't put in there? Is there stuff I should avoid, or is it really just whatever comes out of the heart is fine? Or are there things where you would say, maybe that's not the place for this?
Well, it's like one of the dads I'm helping right now write. He's trying to write an apology, and he wants to make sure that his son is clear that some of the things were not his fault. And I said, man, this is not the time for you can just own the things that you're responsible for. And so
Yeah.
don't try to, you know, cast blame on anybody else for anything.
Right.
You take responsibility as the dad for the things that you can. Apologize for that, and then they can, they can do with it what they want. Hopefully, they receive the apology.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. That doesn't seem like that's the place where where you can say this happened, but it wasn't my fault, and this happened, but it wasn't my fault. Yeah, I
Yeah,
could, especially as the kid, even an adult child reading that, being able to kind of process it differently than a young child being able to process it. It's still, yeah, I can see how that wouldn't go over all that well.
well, and it's not the time either to
Yeah.
bring up a person's shortcomings. Like if you're writing to a child your letter, you wouldn't in this letter want to say, how much potential they had, but then they haven't reached it yet. You're not trying to
Right.
put your kids down.
Right. Right.
I think about, the prodigal son
Mhm.
and how now that I'm a dad and now that I'm helping dads, I really look at it from the father's point of view. And man, that father, when he saw his son coming, man, he ran towards his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him
Yeah.
and held him tightly. And he didn't bring up all these things like, well, you should have done this. Why did you blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Man, he just embraced him and celebrated that he was back.
Yeah.
And so that's what I try to help dads do with their letter and really affirm their children and, really communicate, man, I love you. I believe in you. And there's nothing you can do. Like, I love you unconditionally. Because that's what our Heavenly Father does. He loves us
Right.
unconditionally.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. So when you were describing some of the things there um, that you have guys included, you mentioned, think if you're on your deathbed and you just have a few minutes or a few pieces of advice to share. Have you noticed some commonalities that guys come up with there in that advice section?
yeah, there are some similarities. I mean, there was one dad yesterday. I was helping him on a Zoom call, and he said, "Man, I really want my children to understand the power of no, because if you can't tell people no, you're gonna get mixed up. Your
Yeah.
schedule's gonna be full. You have a vision and a mission you're trying to accomplish, and if you can't tell people no, the world's gonna come in on your schedule."
Right.
And so he's going to help his children understand that. And several dads have said some things like that. And then a lot of dads talk about, and really, especially Christian dads. Now, I've designed the course in a way to where um, an atheist could go through it, and I've had
Sure.
atheists
Hmm.
go through it. And I actually had a guy out in California heard this story on a podcast, signed up, and ended up coming to Christ through the process. First
Wow.
ever believer
That's
in his
amazing.
family.
Wow.
And he told me a couple weeks ago, he said, man, how could I not have been thinking about God as I was opening up my heart to write this letter? And so then other dads were reading their letter and sharing the gospel to their children. Well, he ends up hearing the gospel. I got to share the gospel with him, and man, first ever believer in his family, which is pretty cool.
That is
Um,
cool.
but so for the Christian dads, I definitely want to help them, and this is what they want to do is they want to use their. And this is what my dad did for me. The best thing my dad did for me was point me to our Heavenly Father, and that's what we want to do as Christian dads. So a lot of dads do that, and then also a lot of dads talk about just serving people and loving people. Talk about
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing to have somebody go through the process and that's their path. That's their path to Christ. But whatever the path is, right? If that if that becomes the path, that's just awesome. That's just amazing. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm having some dads in my neighborhood starting next week come over to my back porch, and I'm gonna say bring a beer. These guys are not church going guys, but they want to be good dads. So
Sure. Right. Right.
we're gonna go. I'm gonna lead them through the process of writing a letter to their children, and we'll see what God does through it. But I definitely want to partner with more churches, and especially for the men in their church, but also as an outreach event, because you know it's not a it's hard to get like guys to go through a course or go through a workbook or something like this, but dads like going through this because they want to write a letter.
Right.
Dads don't want, like, the idea of communicating to their children how they feel about them, and it's crystal clear. You've written it down, and also like if something were to happen to you, you know, Lord, hopefully that doesn't happen, but it's written down. And so I say, dads ask me all the time, like, when should I write this letter? Like what's the perfect age? I'm like, well, the perfect age was the day your children were born, and then the second perfect time is now. And so
Yeah.
this is something don't want to wait on. But I help dads write it to their adult children. I help dads write it to their unborn son, unborn daughter. And man, if you think that their kid, so now he's a couple months old, if he'll never doubt that his dad loves. His dad took a couple months, even before he was born, to write down on a piece of paper, write down on a letter that he loves him and he's proud of him. It's like, man, that kid will never wonder if his dad loves him. Of course he loves him.
Yeah. Do you find any difference in working with the client who's writing to an adult child versus a client who's writing to a kid who's an infant or not born yet?
Well, obviously, the older that your kids are, you can be a little bit more specific on what you want to accomplish with the letter.
Yeah.
And their personalities a little bit better, and the older they are. And so, um, and then you can utilize memories in a different way. But it's like
Yeah.
one of the dads recently, he realized he had not been there as much as he wished he would have, looking back. And so he was using his letter to tell his children, hey, I think you guys should be more committed to your families than I was to you guys.
Yeah.
And also, so he wrote to his daughter and his son, and he was afraid that they were not as close. Like they had drifted apart. They lived in different towns, and they were having their own families. But he could see what was happening, and he's like, man, I want to see you guys be closer. And his kids will be closer because his dad took the time to write this into his letter.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, it's a pretty cool letter.
Yeah. Yeah. On that side of saying, like, wish I would have been there more, spent more time with you, and so on. I could see that drifting a little bit negative. Like here's all the things I regret. How would you rein in somebody who's starting to go down that path when they're writing this? I mean, there's a certain amount of that I'm guessing, and you correct me if this is wrong, but that I'm guessing is okay because you want to share that with your kids. But I think if the letter would end up, I wish I did this, I wish I did this, I'm sorry I did this, I wish I would have done that. I think that would skew, right, the feeling of the letter. So how do you work with guys who are kind of down that path of it becoming a list of regrets versus empowering their children?
Well, to be honest, I haven't faced that a ton yet.
Good. Then I'm throwing in a scenario that doesn't happen often.
Yeah, that scenario hasn't really happened. Usually, I'm
Good.
trying to help dads just to apologize some.
Yeah.
Most of us are pretty prideful guys.
Yeah.
So just trying to help dad apologize for a little bit. So yeah, that's not too big of an issue.
Not good. Then that's easy. It doesn't happen.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So for you personally, hey guys, very quick break here. If you're looking for a community of like-minded Christian men to walk the walk of life together with, check out the Significant Man Fellowship. We meet every week to learn, laugh, hold each other accountable, and just do life together. You know the lone wolf thing just doesn't work. So check out the fellowship and see if it's right for you. And if you want to take it to the next level and experience an amazing 4-day and 3-night immersion experience here in the glorious Colorado mountains, apply to be one of the few men who attend our Significant Man Base Camp event. It's not a mega retreat, it's a small group of dedicated Christian men who are committed to improving themselves as husbands, fathers, friends, and leaders. So check that out. All right, back to the show.
Yeah. Yeah. So for you personally, I'm assuming you have gone through this exercise for yourself. What did you learn about you going through this exercise?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, as I was sitting down thinking through, like, what are the what advice I want to give my children, I kind of had to do a deep dive. Okay, what is the best advice I can give my children? I had to
Yeah.
think about um, failure, and I had not maybe put a ton of thought into that. But I realized, and maybe I think I'd read something. It's like, well, my kids are going to experience failure. And how do I want them to deal with failure? Do I want them to be afraid of it, or do I want them to be, you know, accept it? And really, I just got to this spot. It's like, man, no, actually, I want my kids to experience failure because that means that they're trying. If they're not trying, then they're not never going to experience failure. And every time you experience failure in something, it's not a failure in the sense that life is over. It's like, no, you just gain some more experience and you'll learn something and you'll take it on to the next thing. So failure is a really beautiful thing. It's all about your perspective on it. And so for me, like thinking through, okay, this is advice I want to give my children. Well, actually, I was really just preaching at myself
Yeah.
as I'm starting to get this business off the ground, and as I've experienced different setbacks, and some weeks are harder than others. And it's like, no, like I got to keep going, just keep grinding it out. And man, it's been pretty amazing as God has continued to open up doors. And I'm starting to work with NFL teams and Major League Baseball players, and companies are starting to buy this for their employees, and financial advisors and insurance agents are buying it for their clients. And it's like, man, if I had just given up, I would never have been able to
Right.
see all this happen, but
Right.
just kept going.
Yeah. Yeah. So you taught you about you
Yeah,
while you were writing
exactly.
the letter. Yeah.
Well, and that's the feedback I get from a lot of dads. Like, oh man, like this is one of the best things I've ever done. And I
Yeah.
find myself, now that I've written this letter to my children, I find myself living out this letter. So, I mean, absolutely, the letter is for our children, but the person who
Right.
feels the most immediate impact is the dad.
Sure. Yeah. So if you're doing I don't know, teaching, so to speak, through there, right? You're giving them lessons, you're teaching them, giving them life advice and so on. When do they read it? Is this literally, we're going to keep this in a box until, down the road when I pass away? Or is this something that I'm sharing with my kids as soon as I've written it?
Well, I mean, the answer is it's up to the dad, right?
Yeah.
I tell dads, like, this is your letter. You can make it
Mhm.
as, if you want to make it one page, if you want to make it 5 pages, it's up to you. Sometimes dads get overwhelmed, like, oh, I got to write this long. Man, just make it one
Right.
page.
Right.
One page is better than zero.
Yeah.
And then as far as when you give it to them, what I tell dads is this is really powerful. Like the things that you've communicated in here, I think you want to give it to them sooner rather than later, so that your words can really help them through life and help them as they're facing different decisions. It's like one of the dads that I'm helping right now, he's the vice president of the Arizona Cardinals. His daughter was turning 13, and she's about to go, as any 13-year-old, like it's a really really vulnerable time in her life. And so he wrote her this letter to give to her on her 13th birthday, because he wants her to know, as she's being guys are starting to come after her, and
Yeah.
whatever it is, he
Sure.
wants her to know, hey, you've got a daddy that loves you.
Yeah.
And so he actually messaged me the other day and said, I just gave it to her. And
Nice.
and she went into her bedroom, and he could see her through the crack in the doorway reading it. And then she came out and she gave him a big hug and a kiss, and I think he got a little emotional,
Yeah,
but
we
he was
should,
proud.
right? I
He
mean,
was right. Yeah, he was proud of his letter, and also knowing that as a dad, he's doing whatever it takes
yeah.
to get his voice into his children's life, which is exactly what they need.
So if he or someone else, around that age is giving their letters to their kids when they're teenagers, would you recommend that they write another one, 10, 15 years later as life evolves, as the kids get older, as there's more experiences? How, because I would think it could almost become a regular thing. So how, if there is, like, how often would you have a guy go through this? Because like you said, most men, they're not going to sit down and write a 5-page thing.
Right.
So you certainly wouldn't
Well,
become kind of like the bi-monthly chore. It wouldn't be
right.
that.
No, no, definitely not.
When is good to keep updating it, so to speak?
Well, so my mission is to help dads write at least one.
Right.
But then, so once a dad learns this process
Hmm.
and he's done it once, then it is easier to do it a second and third and fourth time.
Yeah.
So there's dads that are saying, "Hey, I'm going to do this every year." There's some dads who are saying, "I'm going to do this kind of around every milestone, whether it's teenager, graduate high school, before they go off to college and they graduate college." Um, so it's kind of up to the dad. So
Yeah.
I wrote uh, one to my children. So I have a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and a 6-month-old last year. And then honestly, ever since then, I'm like, oh man, and especially helping other dads write their letter.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh man, that was some good advice. I need to rewrite another one. So I'm not going to wait any longer. Like
Yeah.
I'm pretty soon, I'm actually going to start writing them their next letter.
Nice.
And it's not an updated letter because I'm not going to go back and edit it. It'll be a new letter,
Sure.
but in a sense, it's an updated letter, like with some new life advice. So,
Yeah. That's cool. So you just touched back on, this being your mission and stuff. What about this work for you personally makes it meaningful, makes it uplifting, makes it fulfilling? What about this work does that for you?
man, there's so many things. Number one, just on the individual level, I love helping dads like take the time to write this letter. I mean, I was speaking to a group of financial advisors a couple weeks ago, and one of the advisors, I finished my speech, and he says, I've been trying to write a letter to my son for the last couple of months, and now you're sitting here telling me this is what you do, like,
Yeah.
and now I've been meeting up with him and helping him communicate, how he feels about him. So anyway, it's just that in itself is powerful, and I love doing it. But then also helping a dad connect on a deeper level with his children. But then even if you step back and we look at all of the problems in the world, um, I know, and I know, and I think a lot of people agree with me. Like it all starts with a dad in the household, and if dads stepped up and were the dads that God's called us to be, I believe that most of our problems would disappear. And so this is one thing that is helping to solve that problem. And so, I mean, a life changes when a dad writes this legacy letter. Can you imagine when a million dads do it? And
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the start. Like I'm praying for way bigger than that. Um, but I'm hoping that we can change the world through the legacy letter challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. Dads do play such a unique role, and so much of our society seems to want to minimize the role of dads, but dads really do play a unique role, just like moms play a unique role. But one of the questions I throw out to people in our conversation here, this isn't for you, and it's kind of rhetorical, but when we see a mass shooter on TV, what are the odds that that shooter had a dad at home who is directly teaching him, or through a letter, how do you love somebody who's different than you? How do you respect somebody who's different to you? How do you show kindness? How do you show mercy, forgiveness, grace? How do you do that, son? And the odds are that's probably zero, right? There's
Yeah.
probably zero mass shooters who were taught those lessons from their dads. And so, yeah, it has a generational impact, because that shooter, whomever they shot, is no longer around for subsequent generations. So, dad really has a unique place.
So I've never done prison ministry. I am hoping to get this into prisons and help dads communicate to their dads that are in prison to their children outside, so they're not following in the same footsteps. But I've talked to some guys who've done prison ministry who have said there's not a guy in prison that had a great relationship with his dad.
Yeah.
But then even so, obviously there's that side of it. But then I just look at every person out there and the potential that someone has in their life. Maybe a person never goes to prison. Maybe they live a very, normal life. But my question is, are they really reaching their full God-given potential? And I think if a person has a dad in their life, a good dad who's saying all the things that a person needs to hear from their dad,
Yeah.
then they're much more likely to reach their full potential. So man, I want to see every person on the planet reach the potential that God has for them. And so we've got to help dads. And part of that is helping dads. Like if we went through a program right now, there was every single dad on the planet was on this call helping them. Well, all those dads didn't have, most of the dads didn't have great dads or get everything that they needed from their dad. Well, because, people are imperfect and sinful.
Right.
And so that's part of being a great dad is actually working through the areas of your life where your dad did come up short, which through going through this process of writing the letter, that's one of the things that we talk about. And we talk about working through those things. And I talk a lot about the concept of a father wound, that we've been wounded by our father and that we are inadvertently wounding our children. Not on purpose, not intentional, but because we're imperfect, we're wounding them. And so we really want to help those wounds heal up. We don't want them to fester, and we want those wounds to become healed and be scars. And so this is for our own life, but we want to help our children heal from the wounds that we've caused them. And so we want to have those become scars.
Yeah. Yeah. And any opportunity that we have to break that sort of generational whatever, right? Well, my dad never talked and grandpa never talked and great grandpa never talked. So I don't share any time that we have an opportunity to break that chain and move forward, we definitely got to take that. And yeah, none of us are perfect. And we're imperfect men raised by imperfect men who were raised by imperfect men. And we're hoping to just maybe get a little teeny bit better on one of those aspects and not screw up too much worse on the other aspects. And if we can do that, if we can move that ball downfield just a little bit, if we can break one of those chains and create a more positive environment, if we can make those changes, one generation at a time, we really have such a significant impact for many years to come, right? And it's not even just our own kids. It'd be great grandchildren, theoretically, right? That's the hope. People that we'll never have a chance to meet here on earth, but we hope we're having a positive influence on them. And I think what you're doing here through Legacy Letter has a very, very, very direct impact on that. Exactly.
I don't know what my great grandfather, I don't know much. I never met him, and I don't know much about him. I don't know how he felt about my grandfather or any life advice that he would give. I would love that. But here's the cool thing about all the dads that are writing their legacy letter, and I tell them, your grandchildren, your great grandchildren, your great great grandchildren are going to know how you felt about your family and the advice that you have because it's written down. Yeah. And so in the same way that our Heavenly Father gave us the Bible, he wrote it down, it's lasting. We're just following in his footsteps and we're writing down some things for our family.
Yeah. One of my favorite things about what you do and in listening to you is even when we take just the idea of legacy, by default, the world at least thinks that just means money in a will and house and property and cars or whatever the thing happens to be that we leave behind. But it really isn't. It's the stuff that you're talking about, and it's the stuff that's in letters like that, and it's those sorts of lessons and creating little human beings that become adults that have that kind of character and can teach that on to the following generations. That's the kind of legacy that's so much more powerful and so much more lasting then, and there's nothing wrong. I mean, I'm certainly not, if somebody, wants to earn $50 million and leave it to the kids and charities, go do that, right? I'm not claiming there's anything wrong with that, but being able to do that, to speak in a way that will last through generations, like you're saying. Same thing for me. I know, because we have it written down, I know my great grandfather's name. I know nothing about him. But if there was a letter that I could go read, then I would. And that would last through the generations. And so I really love a lot of what you're doing there. And as we get close to wrapping up, just as an open-ended question, what is something else that we haven't really touched on here about this idea of legacy letter, part of your dad's story that we didn't get to? Anything really that you want to share? What's a last point you want to make sure that folks take away from our conversation?
It's not necessarily new because we've been talking about it, but just going back to the power of a father's voice. And I think in the world that we live in, it's so easy to maybe believe the lie that we're not needed, or that our children don't need us, or that our voice isn't powerful. And that's just a lie from Satan, because our children absolutely need us, and they need us to speak into their life. And so we've got to do it. We've got to do what it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been awesome, man. We could keep talking for a while, but I'm gonna wrap it up here so we actually can get done in the time that we have. So for guys who want to learn more about you and about your work, where should they go?
Yeah, you can go to legacyletterchallenge.com and sign up. I get an email all the time of dads who heard my story on a podcast. They sign up, and then as soon as someone signs up, they get access to all the lessons and the community of other dads that are writing their letter. And then of course, if they, I have a lot of businesses and people with clients who buy packages for those people, and so I'd love to help someone do that as well.
Cool. Well, hey Blake, this has been awesome. Really enjoyed talking with you today. Thanks very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Warren.
All right.
Hey, before you go, please make sure you subscribe to this show and leave a review. 5 stars is, of course, the desired number of stars, so be like all the cool kids and do that. Enjoy the next show, guys.